In this video, 10 obscure anti-meta Yu-Gi-Oh cards you may or may not have ever heard of. Most of these are pretty cheap, some of them are pretty good, and it'll be up to you to decide if they're worth giving a try. Let's get started. Card number 1, Power Filter. So it's a continuous spell that says neither player can special summon monsters with 1,000 or less attack. Pretty simple effect, obviously not without its weaknesses like many other cards in this list, but it's really cool because think about it, every single format, there are going to be small monsters, little things that get special summoned and have effects that lead to the more powerful monsters. So we're talking cards like Cosmo Tin Can, cards like Shadow Mist, cards like Taki Tomborg. These are cards that get special summoned and they have less than 1,000 attack, so they're really small and they can actually be kind of tough to deal with. Sometimes you don't necessarily want to waste your effect veiler on them if you don't have to, or things like that, and they're not really susceptible to cards like Bottomless necessarily, so this is actually a really great floodgate to just completely stop your opponent from summoning any of them at all. Now obviously being a continuous spell means that you can't really chain it to things, so it's hard to cut off a play. It's pretty easy for your opponent to probably play around it or use MST or Twin Twisters, but this card does really put in the work, especially if you are running a deck that doesn't necessarily get affected by it. Fun fact, this can even actually stop your opponent from summoning Dante, because Dante has 1,000 attack. Next card, Success Probability 0%. So kind of an older card, but basically it makes your opponent send 2 random fusion monsters from their extra deck to the graveyard. Why is this useful? Well, getting rid of fusion monsters helps in this format with ABCs and stuff, but in a more practical sense, most decks are running things like Instant Fusion, things like Brilliant Fusion. So by using this card, you can force somebody to send like a Norden and a Gymnite Seraphinite to the grave instantly. And that might be the only fusion monsters they're running. But also, even against Burning Abyss, this could send like the Pilgrim or, things like that. Against Metal Foes and ABCs, it might not actually be as useful because they have so many fusion monsters. So I think that against maybe any of those decks that have lots, it's not as great. But against some of the hero builds that only really run like Darklaw in their extra deck and stuff, this can actually be a pretty useful card. Now you're probably thinking, well, why wouldn't I just run Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries? And that's true, but not everybody has 25 or 30 bucks to drop on one, much less a playset. So, this is actually pretty decent. It's a nifty little card and you can chain it. So, if you chain this to something like Instant Fusion, you can actually stop their activation entirely, which is pretty cool. And this doesn't waste space in your extra deck. So, unlike with Ghost Reaper, you don't have to have a Dante in your extra deck or a Buster Dragon in your extra deck just because. Third, Summoning Curse. So, it's a continuous spell. When a player special summons a monster or monsters, that person has to randomly banish a card from their hand, and that's pretty powerful. I've actually always been surprised this card didn't catch on a bit more. Now, yes, it's, MST and stuff like that, they'll get rid of it, but still, when your opponent's playing those kinds of decks that involve a lot of small special summons, this can get rid of a lot of cards in their hand. And this even works when you summon like a Kaiju or something to their field. So if you're running a deck that doesn't special summon a lot of monsters, like most anti-meta decks tend to be, then this is great. Think about a Burning Abyss player who has to summon 2 Burning Abyss monsters from his or her hand and then make Dante. That's like 3 summons, just 3 cards that can get banished. So, very powerful as long as you're not running a special summon heavy deck. Like I said, this can put in a load of work. And also the 500 life points that you have to pay during the end phase is optional, so whenever you want, you can actually let this card get destroyed, so that's pretty cool. Next is Chain Disappearance. So this is actually one that's kind of been up and down throughout the game's history. When your opponent summons a monster with 1,000 or less attack, you banish all copies of that monster in their deck and in their hand, if I am remembering correctly, and also the one in the field. So this is a great way to get rid of a lot of those same pesky cards that we were talking about with Power Filter. You can use this card and get rid of them with it. So, things like Shadow Mist, imagine getting rid of all the copies of a Shadow Mist that a hero player has, or Swap Frog and Ronin Totem, so you don't have to deal with Totally Awesome in a lot of decks. And same thing with stuff like maybe Cosmo Tin Can and Straw Hat. Might not be as useful for them because they can recycle them. But still, all those small monsters, Blue Eyes Sage and things like that. Great way to deal with all of them really easily. And I think that actually in the future, it'll be really great when that Zodiac Molmarak card comes out, because this can hit it. So yeah, definitely pick this up if you don't have it already. Next one's another favorite of mine and the band Played On. So neither player is able to special summon monsters with the same level as ones they already control, and they also can't special summon monsters with the same rank as ones they already control. So how does this work exactly? Basically, if I have a level 4 monster in the field, I can't special summon another level 4 monster. So if I had, like, say, Satellar Knight Altair, I couldn't actually summon another Satellar Knight from my graveyard because, you know, they're level 4, and I already have a level 4 monster. Same with Xyz, if I already have a rank 4 on the field, I can't make another rank 4 monster. So that's extremely useful for shutting out a lot of opponents' plays because, you know, more often than not, you're going to be playing against something like Burning Abyss or some rank 4 spam type of deck, and this is a great way to just say, nope. It really kind of halts your opponent in their tracks, and unlike cards like Vanity's Emptiness, I mean, it's not something that your opponent can necessarily get rid of as easily, and that's really good. Now, like with certain other cards in this list, you have to make sure that this card doesn't get in your deck's way. So, you know, maybe a Synchro-based deck would love this kind of card, whereas an Xyz-based deck probably wouldn't. But if your deck happens to not supposed to summon a lot at all, or summons lots of synchros, then this is probably a great card to look at. Next is an oldie but goodie, King Tiger WANGHUBE. So this is actually one of the earlier anti-meta cards entirely, kind of back in the days with Fossil Dyna and Jalgan the Spiritualist and cards like that. So King Tiger says your opponent, or well, when a monster gets summoned that has less than 1400 attack, normal or special summoned, it gets immediately destroyed. This is great. This stops cards like, you know, the Speedroid engine, the Tour Guide engine, like literally the cards will just get destroyed as they get summoned, and that's great. And like with, you know, Chain Disappearance and Power Filter, all those small cards that those cards are kind of meant to stop, they'll also get stopped by King Tiger. And King Tiger has an even higher attack threshold, which is how it's actually able to hit, you know, Speedroid Terror Top and stuff like that. So definitely one that, in my opinion, is kind of underrated in the sense that it is a monster, so it does waste a normal summon, and if your deck doesn't really get a lot of use, or, you know, if your deck needs its normal summon, then this card might slow you down, but it is still really great. It's like a monster floodgate, and it can actually be a little bit harder for some decks to deal with than just a Speller Trap that they can Twin Twister away. So as with any other card on the list, take a look at it, grab some. So the next card is one of my favorites and another oldie but goodie, and that's Share the Pain. So it's a normal spell, you tribute a monster and you force your opponent to tribute a monster, but for no effect. So what does that mean exactly? That means that your opponent is just tributing a monster simply kind of by choice. They're not tributing it for Share the Pain's effect, and that's relevant because it means that if there's a monster that they have that, say, like, can't be targeted or is unaffected by spell cards, it doesn't get around this. This is your opponent tributing that monster. So in the past, this was a really good way to get around cards like Apocryphal Towers and some of the boss monsters of today that have some sort of built-in protection against, you know, spells or traps, or like this card can't be targeted or this card can't be destroyed. They are all, you know, prone to this card. So this is a really useful way to get rid of some of the more troublesome boss monsters. It won't necessarily help against like Tree Toad or, well, Totally Awesome and like Cyber Dragon Infinity, which could negate it, but it is still useful against some of them, and it's a pretty handy card, especially if you have something that can actually benefit from being tributed itself. So next is Summon Limit. It's a trap. It's actually one of my favorites. I found out about it a few years back, and I've always kind of wanted to implement it, and I think now more than anything, it's probably more relevant. Your opponent can't summon, or well, neither player can summon more than twice per turn. So this is great against those decks, Synchro and Xyz decks especially, that really kind of have to summon something and summon something else, then make an Xyz or make a Synchro, or, you know, kind of that sort of deal. So basically, once they've made that second summon, they're kind of locked out of their turn. So, you know, a simple example would be Speedroid, you know, Terror Top, it gets special summoned, and then it gets Takitomborg, and Takitomborg summons itself, and then they're at a standstill because they can only summon 2 monsters per turn. And, you know, that even includes a normal summon, so the same would go for something like, say, Tour Guide. Next is another continuous trap, STYGIAN Dirge. So this actually decreases the levels of all your opponent's monsters by 1, and this is low-key one of the most clutch side deck cards I have ever used, I swear. The benefit here is that this stops Xyz decks and Synchro decks. Think about it, right? Your opponent's monsters all go down a level, so all of the plays that they had in mind to make an Xyz monster are completely turned off. You know, Burning Abyss can't make Dante, they can't make rank 3s, because all their Burning Abyss monsters become level 2. And also, you know, this goes for any rank 4 spam decks that, you know, we all love to hate so much. And also Synchro decks. A lot of Synchro decks have very like cut and dry plays for what Synchros they're going to make. And with this here, all their monsters go down a level, which means all of their synchro summons are changed, and oftentimes for the worse. Sometimes they don't have really an optimal play that they can go into. So Stygian Dirge is great. I actually remember using it in the Dragon Ruler days as a way to sort of just stop the Dragon Rulers. I mean, you know, this was kind of when they were synchro summoning and Xyz summoning, and it stopped them from making Draco Sack and Big Eye, and also, you know, stops them from even making like Star Eater and Leo, kind of back when that was a thing. And the last card is a spell, Nobleman of Extermination. This is another classic card, I would say. You banish a face down card, and if it's a trap, then your opponent actually has to banish all copies of that trap that they've got. Now, this is sometimes like a bit iffy. I mean, the only trap that you're mainly going to be aiming to hit here would be Solemn Strike. So if you can hit a Solemn Strike and get rid of all your opponent's Solemn Strikes, do be careful, of course. If you have Solemn Strike, you have to get rid of your copies too. That's how the card works. And also, if your opponent changes the trap that you target with this, then they won't have to get rid of all their copies. So that's another little thing to be careful of. Like I said, it's not a perfect card, but it is pretty interesting. I mean, in some ways, it's got its advantages over MST. Just banishing cards in general is pretty good because so many spells and traps have that whole, like, when this trap's in the grave, you can banish it later to do something else. And of course, who wouldn't want to get rid of more copies of Solemn Strike from their opponent before they can get used against them? So yeah, it's a card that's worth, you know, taking a look at. It may be a better card than MST for you. It just kind of depends. And those are the 10 anti-meta cards that I think are pretty underrated, pretty obscure. I actually got this idea from a recent Reddit thread where people were just sharing these. So shout outs to Yu-Gi-Oh! Reddit. It's a great place. But anyway, yeah. If you have any other suggestions for cool anti-meta cards that have helped you, leave them in the comments, explain why, it'd be really cool. Because, you know, not everybody has the money to get, like I said, Ghost Reaper and playsets of Solemn Strikes and things like that. So for us laymen, we have to use other things, and these can actually be a lot of fun and really actually kind of put your opponent in a tough situation if you use them at the right time. Anyway, though, that's it. So sponsor stuff is down in the description. Remember, I'm giving away a playmat, so you can check out that video for more information on that giveaway. Subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'll see you guys in the next one.